In the summer of 1904, a woman named Matilda Coxe Stevenson submitted a report to the Bureau of American Ethnology in Washington that ran to 634 pages and documented, with a precision no one before her had attempted, the ceremonial architecture of the Zuni Pueblo in western New Mexico. Stevenson had lived among the Zuni across 2 decades, absorbing a knowledge of their settlement and their ceremonial life that made her report the most detailed ethnographic survey of any North American Pueblo people produced in that century. The Zuni had shown her a great deal. They had permitted her into ceremonies, drawn her maps of their territory, and spoken to her in ways that ran against the grain of everything the federal government was doing to their community at that time. They had also told her, plainly and more than once, that one section of the old residential complex would not be shown to her at all. The southwestern quarter of the Pueblo, where the floors descended through levels of construction going back several centuries, contained chambers that no Zuni entered and that no outsider would be brought to. She was not told what those chambers held. She was not told who had sealed them. She was not told how long they had been closed. She recorded this on page 218 of her report in a single paragraph and did not return to it. 7 years later, a member of the Bureau's field staff returned to it for her. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. That restraint was not typical of Stevenson. The Bureau's correspondence from her years at Zuni documents more than one confrontation with Zuni leaders who had specifically asked her not to photograph ceremonies she then photographed anyway, not to enter restricted spaces she then entered regardless, and not to publish details of ceremonial practice she then published in full. Stevenson pushed. She pushed consistently, and across a long career among the Zuni, the record shows she pushed against almost everything she was told not to approach. Almost everything. The southwestern chambers she recorded in one paragraph and left alone, without explanation anywhere in the surviving correspondence. The Zuni Pueblo occupies a stretch of ground on the south bank of the Zuni River in what is now western New Mexico, roughly 40 miles below the Arizona line. The settlement has stood on the same site since at least the 13th century by documented archaeological reckoning, and the physical construction record places earlier occupation at the same location going back to the 11th century or before. From the outside, it presents itself as what it has always been, a dense layered mass of sandstone and adobe, rooms built against older rooms, walls repaired and extended and rebuilt across so many generations that the structure carries its own history inside it, the way a geological formation carries time in its strata. The oldest sections of the complex do not announce themselves from the road. They are interior things, accessible only from within, and they go down. The passage Stevenson had been warned away from was located at the base of an interior stairwell in the southwestern cluster, in rooms the Zuni described in translations available from her personal field notes as the place the old ones left behind. That phrase does not appear in the published 1904 report. It survives in the personal field notes Stevenson donated to the Smithsonian Institution at the close of her career. Those notes were not formally catalogued until 1947 and were not compared against the published report until a researcher named Helen Tanner requested both documents in the same archive visit in 1961. The stairwell descended through 3 distinct construction phases, each identifiable by the composition of the mortar and the method of stone cutting visible in the walls. At the lowest level, both changed entirely. The coursed sandstone, typical of post-contact Pueblo construction, gave way to a different technique, one in which stones were fitted without mortar in a pattern designed to distribute load across each joint, rather than rely on binding material to hold the wall together. The joints were tight, each stone selected and dressed to bear against its neighbors with a gap narrow enough that a blade would not pass between them. A researcher who examined photographs of this passage in the 1970s compared the joinery method to that found in the Chaco Great Houses at Chaco Canyon, the large 12th century ceremonial structures abandoned by approximately 1250. Chaco had been empty for 6 centuries by the time the Bureau sent its field party down those stairs. The chamber walls beneath the Zuni Mesa had been fitted by someone who already knew exactly what they were doing. The field agent who descended that passage in April of 1911 was operating under a letter of commission from the Bureau's director, Frederick Webb Hodge, who had taken his position the preceding year and was overseeing an expansion of the Bureau's survey work across the Pueblo southwest. Hodge's correspondence from that spring, held in the National Anthropological Archives at the Smithsonian, documents a field operation at Zuni during those months and does not mention the chambers. Whether that absence reflects a deliberate choice to keep the matter out of formal correspondence, or simply the ordinary distance between what field agents encounter and what directors are told, depends on which reading of the archive one finds more consistent with what the rest of the record shows. Both readings lead to the same result. The agent's own field notes describe a passage approximately 4 feet wide and 6 feet high at its entrance, narrowing slightly as it descended and curving once before straightening, with walls finished to a smoothness that required deliberate preparation rather than anything the stone itself would produce. The floor was flat and level for the full length of the passage, which matters for a specific reason. Flat floors in underground passages do not happen through erosion or through the natural settlement of fill material over time. They are constructed, and constructing a flat floor across 60 feet of enclosed underground passage requires both intention and the means to carry it out. The passage opened after 60 feet into a first chamber measuring 18 feet by 22 feet, with a ceiling height of just over 7 feet. 2 niches had been cut into the western wall at equal heights from the floor, spaced exactly half the chamber's total wall length apart. The agent measured the spacing twice, from 2 different reference points, and arrived at the same figure both times. In the floor of that chamber, a second descending passage had been sealed with a flat stone slab, set flush with the surrounding surface, and polished smooth on its upper face. The air inside the chamber, according to a note the agent made in the margin of his field report, was dry and still in a way that suggested the space had not been opened or ventilated for a very long time. The stone surfaces carried no moisture damage visible to the eye, no efflorescence on the walls, no biological growth on the floor. A chamber opened and resealed repeatedly across generations would show those signs. This one did not. The agent wrote that the silence inside the room was of a kind he had not encountered in any previous underground survey, and that the lantern flame burned without any flicker for the full time he spent inside. Within the first hour of the agent's descent, the Zuni governor Waihusiwa arrived at the entrance with an interpreter. Waihusiwa had dealt with federal visitors and bureau researchers across a career that Stevenson's own papers describe as marked by careful patience rather than confrontation, and what he said to the agent through the interpreter was not a demand or a threat. His words, recorded in a handwritten addendum to the field report, translate approximately as, "What is in those rooms has not moved in a long time. The agreement about them was not made by us. You should not be the one to break it," the agent continued. The sealed slab over the second passage required 2 men to lift, and was found, according to the field notes, to have been weighted from below with a flat stone of equal dimensions placed directly beneath it, as though whoever closed the passage had intended the seal to resist not only entry from above, but pressure from below. The space beneath the slab opened immediately into a second, shorter passage, approximately 30 feet in length, descending at a steeper angle than the first. The walls of this passage showed evidence of fire, not fire damage but controlled heat application against the stone face, the kind left by sustained burning held close to the rock over time. The second chamber measured 14 feet by 14 feet, with a ceiling height of 5 feet 9 inches. What the second chamber held is where the documentary record begins to show its limits, in ways that are specific and traceable. The field report continues for 11 pages describing the first chamber in careful detail, its dimensions, its wall surfaces, the 2 niches, the sealed floor passage. At page 12, the handwriting changes. A different ink begins a paragraph mid-sentence, as though the pages that should have preceded it have been removed, and what remains is the continuation of something that started elsewhere. What follows lists 7 objects removed from the second chamber and prepared for transport to Washington. The objects are described by their physical properties only, with no sketches, no photographs despite the equipment inventory confirming the agent carried a camera, and no measurements beyond approximate. The list records 2 ceramic vessels, one intact, a ceramic vessel described as black-on-black ware with a resist decoration technique not identified in the classification literature the agent had with him, a bundle of textile material too deteriorated for detailed description, a flat stone tablet, approximately 12 by 16 inches, with incised marks running continuously along all 4 edges, and 2 objects described only as metal, each approximately 9 inches in length, of a composition the agent could not determine without laboratory equipment. Metal. In a sealed chamber beneath a Pueblo site that predated European contact by centuries. Copper bells traded from Mexico appear in the pre-contact record of the Pueblo Southwest. Small copper ornaments appear in excavated Chacoan contexts. 9-inch objects of unknown metal composition in a sealed lower chamber beneath the main Zuni Mesa do not match any object type in the classification literature the Bureau's researchers were working from in 1911. The agent noted the discrepancy. He underlined the word metal. The report ends 4 lines later. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The Bureau's transport log for spring 1911 records a shipment received from the Zuni field station in the 3rd week of May. The itemized list covers 31 ceramic fragments, 2 intact vessels, and what the log calls miscellaneous organic material. The flat stone tablet does not appear. The 2 metal objects do not appear. A notation in the margin of the log, written in a hand that does not match the regular recorder's entries on the surrounding pages, reads, "Held for separate assessment." No record of that assessment appears anywhere in the Bureau's archive. No document shows where the objects were sent for assessment or whether any such process was ever initiated. The notation is the final appearance of those objects in any document that researchers have located in the century since. Hodge's own correspondence for the summer of 1911 references the Zuni shipment once, in a letter to the Bureau's chief clerk, acknowledging receipt and noting that several items would require additional documentation before they could be formally catalogued. The additional documentation is not in the archive. The spaces in the accession log where it would appear are blank. A notation in the Bureau's general correspondence file for the autumn of 1911, separate from the Zuni field records, references a package of materials requiring specialist assessment and lists a holding location as room 14 of the Bureau's Washington office. A researcher who attempted to verify this in 1963 found that the Bureau's records for room 14 from that period had been classified under a general housekeeping category and transferred to a storage facility in Maryland during the office reorganization of 1926. The Maryland facility received the transfer. It has no outgoing record for those materials. The chambers were not re-entered by any Bureau field party after April of 1911. The records for Zuni from 1912 onward show no follow-up survey, no photographic documentation of the second passage, no attempt to assess the sealed floor of the second chamber. What those records do show is a letter from Waihusiwa's successor as governor, received by the Bureau in the spring of 1912, formally requesting that the passage entrance be sealed and that Bureau access to the southwestern cluster of rooms be restricted. The Bureau's reply to that letter is absent from the correspondence file. The restriction itself appears without explanation in every subsequent field survey of the Zuni settlement produced through the 1930s, noted as a standing condition and never explained in any of those reports. The field agent who entered the chambers submitted one additional report to the Bureau that summer, addressing agricultural terracing along the Zuni River, a survey entirely unrelated to the chambers and their contents. His name appears in Bureau employment records through the autumn of 1911. After that, nothing. No formal separation notice, no reassignment to another posting, no retirement, no correspondence. The employment record carries his start date, his position classification, and a final entry line that would normally record a reason for departure. the line is blank. This combination of entry, incomplete documentation, missing objects, and institutional silence does not belong to the Zuni case alone. In the summer of 1906, a surveying party working under the General Land Office mapped an underground complex beneath sandstone bluffs along the Little Colorado River in what was then Arizona Territory. The survey notes, now held at the Bureau of Land Management's Regional Archive in Phoenix, describe chambers connected by low passages with walls bearing incised geometric patterns that the lead surveyor identified as related to, but distinct from, the Anasazi decorative tradition documented at northern sites. The notes describe a descent toward a lower level that the party did not complete, citing failing lantern fuel and air conditions that made continued work inadvisable. The final entry describing that section of the complex is dated June 15th of 1906. The next entry is dated June 18th. 3 days of the survey log are blank. The entry for June 18th begins with a distance calculation measured from a reference point that does not appear in any earlier entry in the log, as though the party had relocated during those 3 days without recording the transit. Objects recovered from that section of the survey appear in the General Land Office accession log under the heading Miscellaneous Stone and Ceramic Material, Northeastern Arizona, a heading that covers more than 200 separate items from more than a dozen sites surveyed that season. There is no way to connect any specific object to the underground complex, because the site-specific records for that portion of the survey are not in the Phoenix archive. They were listed as transferred to the Bureau of American Ethnology in the autumn of 1906. The Bureau's own accession records for that period contain no record of receiving them, two institutions each pointing toward the other, nothing between them. A related gap appears in the Bureau's Hopi survey records from 1908 through 1910. Those surveys documented underground ceremonial rooms at a Mesa top site near Second Mesa that the Hopi leadership had formally asked the Bureau to leave undisturbed. The Bureau's correspondence files acknowledged the request. The field reports document entry regardless. 3 of those reports, covering a period of 5 weeks in the autumn of 1909, are listed in the Bureau's own finding aids as missing, presumed lost in the General Archive reorganization of the 1930s. That reorganization is real and thoroughly documented. The displaced materials from it have been largely accounted for over the decades since. Those 3 reports have not been located in any inventory. The site near Second Mesa where those rooms were documented is identifiable from the field reports that do survive. It remains restricted today under agreements that predate the modern federal framework of tribal land protection. Researchers who attempted to revisit the site in the 1960s encountered the same standing restriction noted in the Bureau's surveys from 50 years earlier. No explanation for the restriction appears in any administrative record from any period. A site unremarkable within the standard archaeological framework of the day would not require a standing restriction that has not been lifted in over a century. The same entry, the same incomplete record, the same missing objects. At 3 sites, in 3 separate institutional contexts, across 7 years. The chambers beneath the Zuni Mesa were sealed with concrete sometime in the 1920s, according to tribal historical records documented by researchers working with Zuni historians in the 1980s. The timing corresponds to a period of intensive construction activity at the Pueblo under the Indian Services Building Program. That concrete seal does not appear in the Indian Service's own construction records for the Zuni Pueblo, records that are otherwise specific to the level of individual material deliveries and individual days of labor. The 2 niches in the first chamber's western wall, described by the field agent in April of 1911, and visible in outline in 2 photographs from the field report that survive in the Bureau's archive, are cut to a consistent depth and positioned at a consistent height from the floor. The measurement between them, taken from the agent's notes and verified against his second measurement from the opposite wall, equals exactly half the chamber's total wall length. A placement chosen without deliberate design would not produce that relationship at that scale with that consistency. A placement resolved before the first stone was set would produce it as a matter of course. That level of spatial resolution, worked out in advance for an underground room at a depth requiring considerable construction effort to reach, implies a builder for whom the chamber's proportions were not an experiment. They were a standard. A researcher named Eleanor Burke, working in the Department of Anthropology at the University of New Mexico in the early 1960s, spent 2 years attempting to trace the flat stone tablet and the two metal objects through institutional records. Her search covered the Bureau's accession logs, the Smithsonian's physical collection inventory, and the transfer records of 12 regional museums that had received Bureau shipments between 1910 and 1920. She sent 43 letters over the course of that search. The final reply, from the Smithsonian, acknowledged that the institution's records for transfers in that period were incomplete in several areas and that no items matching her descriptions were present in the current collection. Burke's research was never completed and was never published. The 43 letters and her working notes are held at the University of New Mexico's Center for Southwest Research, filed under her family name, under no heading that would connect them to the Zuni case or to the Bureau's 1911 field season. They are rarely requested by anyone who does not already know the case exists. The Zuni have not permitted entry to the southwestern chambers at any point since 1911. Their position has not shifted across any of the legal frameworks or research negotiations of the century since. They are specific about why. The chambers are not theirs to open. The chambers belong to those who sealed them. What is inside was placed there under an agreement that existed before the Zuni's own presence on that ground, and breaking that agreement is not something any living authority at Zuni considers within their right to authorize. That is not the language of religion. It is the language of custody. Whatever the field agent found in the second chamber in the spring of 1911 is documented to the point of an underlined word in a report that ends 4 lines below it. After that, the record closes in the way it closes when it is done speaking, completely, simultaneously, and without acknowledgement of what it is leaving out. The chambers are still below the southwestern section of the Zuni Pueblo. The concrete that sealed them in the 1920s has not been removed, and the flat stone tablet with incised marks along all 4 edges and the 2 metal objects of undetermined composition are still wherever they went after a marginal notation said they were being held for assessment. No assessment followed. No location was ever recorded. Only the notation remains, in a hand that does not match anyone else in the file, and the silence that came after it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.